Okay, we're back. You know, I'm reminded of a poem that was written by Yeats. I believe it was 1919. And he wrote it as he was talking about things that were happening in the United States and around the world, of course, after World War I. And it's called The Second Coming, and many of you may recognize a line or two from it. It starts out and it says, turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Turning and turning in a widening gyre. Think about this for a moment. When you have a storm and the swirl is spinning, we have reached a point in which, for all intents and purposes, folks, the center cannot hold. The center cannot hold because the centrifugal force is swirling out of control. We have a government that is colluding one with the other branches when their clear intent and directive was not to act as voices supporting tyranny within the other, but to be separate. Their goal was supposed to be that they would act as a watchdog, one over the other. That was the intent. Alexander Hamilton said, the true principle of government is this: make the system complete in its structure, give a perfect proportion and balance to its parts, and the powers you give will never affect your security. But that's not been the case. He was assuming, falsely, that men would be honorable, that men would have integrity. That was anything but the truth. He was hoping that we would have men of honor who would do the right things, not based on their own personal benefit or based on their own personal aggrandizement or their own personal fortunes or wealth, but based on what was right for the nation. And from time to time, I'm sure we have. But I believe that those days are long over. the FISA court colludes with federal surveillance programs. The court was put in place as an example to ensure that the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and these agencies were not abusing their authority and their power. But how can we believe that to be the case when every single request that has been submitted to them, they have approved? Not a single one have they said, stop right there, you've gone too far. The FBI issues thousands upon thousands upon thousands of orders to corporations, libraries, demanding records and silencing them under threat of prosecution and imprisonment if you're told that someone's looking into your personal information, your account. Ben Carson came out the other day and said that we are beginning to look like a Third Reich. America today is tantamount to Nazi Germany. Quote, a society where people are afraid to say what they actually believe. Government using tools to intimidate the population. The truth is, we've gone beyond political correctness, and we are living in a police state age. He called it a Gestapo age. I'm trying not to be inflammatory, because the truth is, most people don't want to hear that. They look back on World War II and the horrors that were perpetrated there, and the minute you say fascism, they get all flustered. Well, we're not there. What you don't realize, ladies and gentlemen, is fascism, while practiced by the Nazis in that fashion, wasn't practiced by Mussolini in that fashion. Oh, yeah, sure, he killed a lot of his own people, but not in a wholesale slaughter manner like that. But then again, we're killing tens of thousands of Americans every day with law enforcement. Not every day, but let me clarify the number. We've killed more Americans since 2001, September 11th, than we've lost in Iraq through law enforcement. Now, if you're going to try and tell me that there's not something desperately wrong with that picture, then I don't know how you would define a police state. In other words, between the last 13 years, more Americans have died at the hands of law enforcement in our nation than died at the hands of terrorists and dissidents and insurgents and the people in Iraq. And in fact, not just there, but almost, the number is almost high enough to include Afghanistan. And it will shortly exceed it. Now, you can pretend it's not happening, but it doesn't mean it's not. You fear retribution because you've been taught to fear retribution. You fear speaking out because you've been taught to. But you see, what you don't realize is that when you are prohibited from speaking your mind, when you are prohibited from discussing what's going on around you, you are actually accomplishing the task on their behalf. Because without your speech, things degrade quicker. In fact, Carson had a great way of putting it. He said, the reason that is so horrible, talking about the silencing of free speech, is because the only way you have harmony and reach consensus is by talking. But if, in fact, people are afraid to talk, you never reach consensus. And instead, you grow further and further apart. And that's exactly what's happening. creating a horrible schism that will destroy our nation. He's right. What we have at this stage in the game, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing that resembles what we grew up believing was the nation in which we lived. Right now, the illegal alien population in the United States exceeds the total number of unemployed. Yep. That is stunning. We have more illegals than unemployed, which there may be some connection between the two, but I'll leave that to you to make up your own mind. You see, we have a court system which supported something like Obamacare when it was clearly an unconstitutional mandate. Ask any of our founders, would you approve of the principle and the idea that in order to retain your citizenship, in order to become a law-abiding citizen, you have to engage in commerce? I would think Alexander Hamilton probably would have pulled out a pistol and shot you right in the face. Right then, right there. Because the truth is, our founders didn't put up with this nonsense. In fact, if you look back historically, our founders were a pretty rough crowd. They had no problem having physical battles on the House and Senate floors. In fact, they fairly routinely got into fisticuffs. Not our meek and mild, well-mannered milquetoast lot. Because, of course, that was then and this is now. And gentlemen don't act that way. Well, I would beg to differ, because the truth is, these people were a lot better and a lot finer gentlemen than anyone that we can characterize or point to in Congress today. We have a court system which is acquiescing to tyranny because they fail over and over and over and over to even hear the case, much less rule against themselves. Because they are, in fact, in a conflict of interest position. They're sitting there trying to play Solomon when at some point in time they anticipate getting their half of the baby. They can't possibly be objective. They owe their allegiance to the very government that they're supposed to be defending and protecting the rest of us from. I don't understand why, for the most part, people refuse to see the obvious. Because you don't have to look very hard. I know the law and the practice of law and the legalese associated with it is difficult to understand for a lot of people. But it's made that way on purpose because their goal is to, like the old priests of old, make sure that none can interpret the sacred book without our interpretation inserted in the middle. Jefferson said to us, "Enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like spirits at the dawn of day." Where is our media? Where is our press? Working to enlighten the people. Working to chase the ghosts of tyranny and oppression and forcing them to vanish like spirits at the dawn of day. He later came out and said to us that all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. And yet, in many cases, the courts have actually silenced you by force, by coercion. Jefferson was prolific as a writer, and he's one of my favorites because he succinctly smacked the ball every single time. He understood and knew what to expect from tyrants. He was younger than most of the others, and for the most part, he looked at it in a different way than most of the others. And he was not afraid to speak his mind, even though, quite frankly, it could have meant his life. But as time went on, after the war was over and independence had been declared, he spent an enormous amount of time writing. And as a result of those writings, we have a unique viewpoint, a window, if you will, into the minds of what our founders thought, because many of the letters that he wrote were to others, and then, of course, he received many letters back. And a lot of that has been captured and retained. He certainly wasn't the only one, but he was one of the more prolific writers of the day. He expounded on this concept of knowledge, and he said, the most effectual means of preventing the perversion of power into tyranny is to illuminate, as far as practicable, the minds of the people at large, and more especially to give them knowledge of those facts which history exhibits, that possessed thereby of the experience of other ages and countries, they may be enabled to know ambition under all its shapes and prompt to exert their natural powers to defeat its purposes. The court has an opportunity to educate, to illuminate. The media has an opportunity, far better even than government itself, to educate and illuminate. And has universally, and I do mean universally, failed. Willfully, intentionally, and with malice aforethought. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a crime against humanity. I watched a show on Netflix the other day, which I thought was very impressive, and I would encourage you to watch it. It's called Flame and Citron. Flame, like flame in a fire. Citron, or citron, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but Citron. The names of two men who lived at a time in history where their nation was under assault and had been invaded, and for all intents and purposes had been was under Nazi rule. And these two guys were partisans. And basically what happened is they went around finding those people that were either Nazi sympathizers and or direct Nazi contacts, and they removed them from society physically. They were so effective that their own government sought to have them stop because they were colluding with the Nazis themselves. They went after individuals who wrote and published pro-Nazi propaganda to try to manipulate and trick their own people. They went after those people that formed civilian corps, if you will. They called them, I've forgotten the name of that they called them, something corp or corps. But these were other Dutch individuals who, for all intents and purposes, turned on their own people. These were the ones who manned the roadblocks and so forth and so on. And when they found them, they removed them. And, you know, it was an interesting movie. You got to pay attention to it. It's not the kind of thing you're going to take lightly. When you watch it, you've got to sit down and, because it's all in subtitles. It's spoken completely in Dutch, and so you have to read. But it is a worthwhile movie to see, because it shows that, you know, when you look at a single issue and you look at one instance of tyranny, or you look at one instance of government overreach, it can be construed as a mistake. That sometimes it's, you know, good intentions gone awry. But when you, according to the words of Jefferson, when you see the very definition of tyranny, it is when all powers are gathered under one place. So, when the media, when the courts, when the Congress, when the executive, when they are all operating and colluding together, we are in tyranny. I'm going to leave you with one final quote from Jefferson, because it pretty much sums it up. Single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of the day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers too plainly prove a deliberate, systematical plan of reducing us to slavery. Let's say that for you one more time. A single act of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of a day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers plainly proves a deliberate, systematical plan of reducing us to slavery. Whose word would you trust right now, right here? Would it be, I don't know, John Boehner? Would it be Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, or Mr. Jefferson? Would it be Chief Justice Roberts, Ginsburg, Alito, or Thomas Jefferson? Who really, truly has your best interest at heart, because he has no skin in this game? Any of the aforementioned current leaders, or Thomas Jefferson? I rest my case, counselor. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle our third topic, which is the EPA, the ATF, and DHS, three agencies that have run completely amok, and we're going to talk about examples from each, including the EPA with wood stoves and this thing with this guy in Wyoming where they're fining him $75,000 a day for building a pond. We'll be right back.